Do you ever wonder what your brain's influence is on the leadership you provide? Oftentimes we talk about leadership, but we rarely talk about the way we think or the way others think. Well, if this is a question you've asked yourself or something you've been wondering, you are in luck because today I'm bringing on Dr. Lisa Riegel to discuss how the brain affects our leadership. So, Lisa, welcome to the program. Why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are?
Sure. My career path is pretty windy. I was in sales when I was first out of college, and then in my mid-20s, I did a career switch and decided I wanted to be an educator. So I worked as a teacher for 9 years, and then I was an administrator at a career center for a couple years, and then I started getting involved with workforce development. So I ran the Economic Education Summit for the state of Ohio for a couple years, and started doing a lot of consulting while I was doing my doctoral work at Ohio State. And so I work with businesses and with schools to help leaders more effectively lead. And a lot of leadership is aspirational and inspirational, but it doesn't get too concrete and operational. So that's really where my sweet spot is I help people understand the human side of the system, because policies can shape change, but people make change. And we don't give much good leadership training on the people side. So that's kind of how I work with leaders. I do executive coaching. I run workshops. I help develop, kind of like in the movie Office Space, like Bob and Bob, like, what do you do here? Trying to help people sort of maximize, like, this is my function here and this is what I'm supposed to do, and to streamline those systems, but to do it all with the lens of human behavior.
Yeah, that's fascinating because so often it is all about the organization and about the metrics and promoting that. But yet it takes people to run an organization. And as leaders, I mean, the textbook definition of leadership is getting someone to do something they normally wouldn't do, right? And I don't like that definition, but if you look at all leadership, that's basically it, right? But the human element is so valuable. So break us down a little bit about like how you go about the human element of leadership. Just give us like a synopsis of that.
Sure. So I developed over many years and many iterations an 8C commitment framework, and it addresses all the different components that leaders need to be strategically planning for. And it starts with culture. It starts with the idea that we need people to feel a sense of belonging. I think that COVID has made that more difficult because people started working from home, and you lost some of the community that you would have in an office and opportunities to build culture. So I really work with leaders on, what culture do you want? What is the vibe of your organization? And what I find is that organizations spend millions of dollars creating words, but culture is not words, it's actions. And so how do we develop actions that reflect the values and culture of an organization? The other piece from a brain science perspective that's really important is a sense of belonging. So, if you go into a meeting and you look around and you're like, oh, these are not my people, you shut down and you don't contribute, and you're not, your skills are not maximized, and you just kind of wait it out. Where if you walk in a meeting and you're like, oh, these are my people, then you're like open and you're ready to share and you're ready to collaborate. So being strategic about how we develop a sense of belonging for everyone in the organization is really a foundation for leading anything. And then the rest of the C's kind of get into how to take your dream and make it operational. So the first 3 C's are the planning C's. So it's about clarity and coherence and cadence. And then you have engagement C's, which is the collaboration and coaching. And then you have sustainability C's, which is communication and celebration. And we forget to celebrate. And we celebrate a lot of times either inauthentically, or we only celebrate outcome measures that the people don't have direct impact on. They have, a tertiary impact on those outcomes. So learning how to really celebrate people's efforts, celebrating the small incremental changes that they're making to be more efficient and productive is really important.
Wow. Yeah, I like your whole concept of culture because I find even pre-COVID, culture was something that was lacking, right? Because everyone wanted to do and culture, in my observation, was more about money. both for the corporation, for the employee, whatever. And then, COVID happened and we all got sent home. And I was talking to someone the other day and they said that's when, leaders started having to lead instead of manage.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of leadership education and training that's out there is truly management. And like you said, getting to that human piece, the culture is very important. So do you think that like before you go and look at all the other C's that you said, like culture is like the foundation for all of these. So walk me through how you might advise someone who needs to improve their culture, and then we'll get into all the other C's after that.
Sure. So I think the first thing about culture is that people have to belong. So in the book, I give lots of different ways that you can get your staff to see each other as humans. So like, for example, you can have a once a week happy hour in the morning. You bring donuts or bagels or something, but the rule is you're not allowed to talk about work. You have to talk about your family, your dog, your holiday, whatever it is, to give people a chance to just talk to each other human to human and develop some of those interpersonal relationships outside of work, but within work. So there's a whole list of things that you can do to try to bring belonging into the culture. The second thing is I've worked with organizations to take their value statements, and I always ask this question, and it's amazing how hard it is to answer. If you are living this value, what do you see and what do you hear? And when you get from that 30,000-foot view, because a lot of companies, their culture is a sweatshirt or a mug or a tagline, but it's not really action. And so it doesn't really become the lived culture. It just becomes the aspirational culture. So we go from what does this look like? What does this sound like? And then as a leader, you work to facilitate opportunities for people to do those actions within the culture. And then you celebrate them, you make them visible, and you talk about them and you appreciate them. And I'll give you a quick example. I was at a hospital and I wasn't there as a consultant. I was there having a procedure done. But the doctor came in and said, we're just going to be like 5 minutes. He said, I just have to go out in the hall real quick for 5 minutes. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. So he walked out, the nurses walked out, and my door was open so I could hear them. And they spent 5 minutes and everybody went around the circle and just said one thing that somebody on their team had done that had made their job easier that day so far, or something that they really appreciated. And when the nurse and the doctor came back in, they were smiling. And I said, do you do that every day? And he goes, we do it every day at noon. And he said, it's a quick 5 minute, just check in. And he said, it's been amazing because you walk away feeling good because you did something kind for other people. And you're hearing about the support and the teamwork that the team's doing. And it's a super easy thing to do every day that just, it's that culture in action. We are a culture where we rely on each other and care about each other. Well, what do I see in here? I see us appreciating each other. I hear us sharing stories. So I start with that kind of stuff. And you can tell pretty quickly what a culture looks like just by watching eye rolls. So if you go and watch a leader in a meeting, you can either see the blank stare where behind the stare there's rage bubbling, or you can see the eye rolls, or you can see the quick side eyes between people. And those nonverbals speak volumes about whether or not people feel a sense of ownership and belonging.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's something I observe too. That the leader can influence everything, right? Even if the organization doesn't have a culture, I often say, well, be the leader with whatever you can control, right? Whatever your environment is, whether it's your team or just your group or whatever. And in this case, it sounds like that the hospital was doing that across the whole hospital. But if you're in a situation like that, just start it yourself. Every day start it. And I know a lot of times, especially people in my generation, these icebreakers and stuff, they're more from the younger generations, and sometimes they're awkward, but they don't have to be. Like, you don't have to go around asking everyone what their favorite ice cream is. Ask them something that's like relevant to their lives, right? Get to know, who they are, because I constantly tell myself in the teams I work with is, not everyone's going to be at the same knowledge, skill, and abilities as I am. And everyone most likely is doing their best, but like, what's influencing that? Like, what's the driver behind it? Do they have stressors at home, kids that are sick, or, in Northern Virginia right now, it's a lot of snow on the ground. So I know a lot of people are stressed because their kids can't go to school. And so, just knowing those little things and talking about it right before you get into the work helps a lot. It gives you the empathy and it gives you the human factor of it. And I don't know why we've gotten into a culture. Maybe it's always been like that. It's been that way my whole working life, but the culture of the organization outvalues the culture of the humans, and I like that little tip that you gave there. So yeah, break down so now that we kind of understand the whole culture piece, do you want to break down each one of those, the C's in the little categories they are, and just start at the top and work us down?
Yeah, sure. And the other thing too, with one more thing about culture, is that just having people appreciate each other for 5 minutes a day isn't going to turn your culture around. It's one nugget, right? So the rest of the C's, how you actually manage your team, builds culture as well. And so there's a foundational culture, but you have to follow that up with other actions. So the first action, I would say, and the first C, is clarity. And it is most critical. And it is amazing to me how in any industry that I'm in, how difficult it is to get leaders to clearly articulate their theory of change, of what they want to see. And so the first step is really thinking about that clarity, and also realizing that you need to have like stepping stones along the way. We oftentimes have, here we are at the state we're in, here's the desired state, now go get there. But change is terrifying and people resist change. And so having some stepping stones about like, what's the first thing you do to move you toward the desired state, and being able to celebrate that along the way. So I have them, we do exercises where we go from, okay, you tell me what your change is. And then I start with the same question. What do I see? What do I hear? And we break it down from very like conceptual language into concrete language. And then we say, okay, well, where are you now? So what are the steps that people need to take that get them from where they are to where you want them to be? And that's going to be different for different people because they have different skill sets and different, different perceptions of the scariness of change. So that first C is clarity. And we spend quite a bit of time trying to get that nailed down. The second is coherence, and making sure that what you're asking people to do is coherent with the other things they do. If you've got a new software system you want people to use, which is great on its own, except it doesn't do everything, and now you've got a secondary software system and you've just created twice as much work for somebody, you're not going to have people real enthusiastic about that change. So how do we make sure we're making it coherent, and how are we building on the skills that our staff has already been learning over time so that we can help them to take the change they did in one set of their professional life and apply it again so that the new change isn't as scary. And then the third C is cadence. And that really, I go into, there's reasons people resist change. And some of them are biologic, right? It's our brain resists change because it's scary. And when it's scary, we get stressed because we don't know if we're in danger. So how do we have a cadence that makes sense? If we have people who are just getting started, then they may not be able to change as quickly because they're just trying to learn the system. You might have veteran people, and when you ask them to change, you're threatening their expertise. I might be really good at my ABC process, and everybody on the team comes to me for my ABC process because I'm that resident expert. And now all of a sudden I'm learning a new process, and it's really uncomfortable to realize I'm not the resident expert anymore. It kind of hits your ego. So there's a human side to trying to get that change. So what is the proper cadence to move people through those stepping stones? So those are kind of the planning C's that we work through. And I have exercises that I've used with companies in the book that walk you right through how to do it, how to create a values matrix with your team, how to create, sort of a strategy matrix of what are the resources that we have, what are the actions we're going to take, how are we going to monitor our actions? Because the other huge mistake I see with leaders, that especially when they're more managers, is they're so focused on the outcome measures and the KPIs or the key performance indicators in the organization that they don't measure what the humans are doing. And, if we have a theory of change that if we do ABC, we're going to get more referrals or more sales or more whatever, then we have to make sure we're actually doing what we said we were going to do and celebrating that. Because then if those metrics don't move, we can say, well, our theory of change was wrong, as opposed to you failed people. But if we're only looking at the outcome metrics, then nothing we do is ever enough, because a company's always trying to grow to the next level. So we never get a chance to stop and breathe and say, we did that great, and look at the impact it had. Now, if we just do this, maybe we'll get a bigger impact. So those planning C's are really critical. And then once you get past the planning, then you can go into, how do I engage people? So I talk a lot in the book about collaboration. people put structures in place, and I use the example of like a team huddle. I hate team huddles. I if they're done well, that's great. But I've sat in team huddles where you have 16 people on the call, and all 16 people are not working on the same thing. And so now I'm sitting there, half the time I'm sitting there, none of this has anything to do with my work. It's a waste of time. And so people disengage. And I tell a story where we were in Florida with some neighbors of ours, and they had to do these weekly huddles, and they had like 40 people on these weekly huddles. And we would play cards, and they'd just mute it. And we're playing cards while the huddle's going on behind us. And it's, so how do you construct purposeful meetings? And so there's, I talk about different kinds of talking. There's different types of talking, and if you define those, you can have more purposeful conversations. So, for example, one type of talking is directives. And the purpose of a directive conversation is to clarify. It's the decision has been made. We're ready to move to action. We need to clarify so that everybody understands what those actions are. I have been in so many meetings that digress into a discussion of whether or not we should be doing this, or well, maybe we should do it that way. And it's like, no, the decision was already made. This is about clarifying. And so having directives, then there's dialogues. Dialogues are when we're exploring. The purpose of a dialogue is to seek to understand. So if you're dialoguing, then you don't move to a decision. And I've seen that happen too, where a couple people who are the loud people in the team take over the conversation. Then it's like, oh, okay, well, let's just do that then. That's what we'll do. And then they move ahead. But they didn't really understand all the unintended consequences and other things that will happen based on that decision. So there's some strategies in how to effectively facilitate a dialogue. And then a discussion is where you make a decision. So if you have a discussion, you say, okay, we're going to have a discussion now, make a decision. We dialogued about this. Out of that came these two sort of framework ideas. Our purpose now is to take the best of both of these and to come to a final decision and come to consensus on that. And so naming those types of discussions can be really powerful, and making sure that when you're having collaborative meetings that you have the people who need to be in those meetings and the other people not. And then you can do, I talk about share out meetings for that wider team of 40, how to run those so that they're effective. So that collaboration piece is about the structure of those meetings and purpose, and then also finding a way to balance autonomy and accountability. So I use the analogy of a road. If you're the leader in a company, you get to decide where the road's going to go. Like, that's your job. That's why you sit in that seat. You can take input from other people, but ultimately it's your decision. However, you have a decision on how wide or narrow you want the guardrails of that decision. So if you have really wide guardrails, then you're giving your team a lot of autonomy to craft the way they want to travel down that road. If you have very narrow guardrails, then everybody's doing the same thing and it's very prescribed. And I think that is a sweet spot of leadership, because it requires that you understand the people, their skills, their engagement, their willingness to work together to determine how wide or narrow those guardrails need to be. And then finally, in the celebration, that's the big one. So my doctoral work, I took a construct called academic optimism in schools, and it's been studied at the teacher level, and it's pretty amazing. If you have high academic optimism, then it's like fairy dust. You do better than everybody else, even after you control for socioeconomic status, which is always the mediating variable. So I wonder if this sticks at the leadership level. So I created an instrument to measure it and tested that instrument. And what was interesting is all three of the components of academic optimism broke into two distinct factors. So the efficacy broke into efficacy of instructional leadership and efficacy of management. And so you think about the difference in a leader, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of leadership training is about management and about operations. That doesn't mean you're a good people leader. And I always laugh because they ask, like, what's your leadership platform? Who are you as a leader? And my response is always, you should just simply say, I'm a leader that people follow. Because it doesn't matter what you want to do. It matters what your team needs. And then you need to address the needs of the team and be flexible so that your leadership provides them the support and the celebration and the engagement they need to do it. The other thing that split was celebrations and high expectations as two different things. And I see that a lot in businesses. You've got leaders that expect a lot. They have very high expectations. They're under a lot of pressure to move numbers, but they don't celebrate. And that is a recipe for disaster. Or I see people celebrate with these big, inauthentic, everybody's wonderful, we all work so hard here. And everybody sitting in the room knows that's not true. So how do you create authentic celebration that serves to build collective efficacy on your team?
Wow. So much to unpack there. And I especially like how you started off with the clarity, because I find a lot of time we say change is hard or change is difficult or nobody likes change. Well, maybe we can change that paradigm. And change is sometimes you got to do it with very little instruction or very little collaboration, but most of the time it can take time. So I think getting that clarity and helping everyone to understand why you're doing something instead of just doing it, and just don't say for the bottom line or to be more competitive or whatever. I mean, really start engaging people, because then they own part of it.
Yeah.
So I found that one very, very, I don't know, thought provoking, and something I don't see very much, and probably something we can all change as leaders and organizations in both. The other thing that you talked about that I thought was very interesting was, the whole celebration thing, because in corporate America, at least the ones I've been a part of, it is kind of that plasticky, oh, we'll throw a party, sit around, have an awkward conversation. The leader or the boss will come in, everyone gets even more uncomfortable. They'll say some kind of speech. They'll thank like maybe 2 or 3 people, and then a lot of people are left out, right? So I'd like to see this decentralized from like an organization like at large to more of a small team based or group based celebration. And this is something that I don't do well. I don't celebrate myself, but I try to celebrate others, because I realize as a leader, that's a weakness for me. Like, something comes my way, I'm always like, well, what's next? This is cool. Well, what's next? But I definitely think that's something we can all practice. And I think this is a good correlation to self-leadership, right? Because the way we lead ourselves is the way we lead others. And you talked about this with the guardrails too. Do you find that like leaders who put like very narrow guardrails on the road analogy that you used, do you find them, I don't even know if you've explored this, but are they less confident in their own abilities and they feel like they have to have control? Or what drives that whole guardrailing in your mind?
Yeah, and there's an appropriate use for narrow guardrails as well. I mean, if a leader knows their people, so if you have people who are willing, so I do, it's called an ability attitude, aptitude attitude matrix. So you look at ability and you look at will. So it's like, okay, who's able and willing, who's able but not willing, who's not willing but able, and who's not willing and not able, kind of thing. And I always talk about like any organization is like a crew boat with people rowing. And in the American corporation, you have usually about 2 to 3 people that are rowing the boat in the right direction. Then you have about 5 people that are sightseers, and they might stick their oar in the water every once in a while. And sometimes they're in alignment, and sometimes they're actually creating drag because they're rowing all over the place. And then you have people who are the boat sinkers, and they are actively trying to sink the boat. And so when you think about your guardrails, you want to think about your attitude aptitude matrix, because if you've got people who are willing but not able, some narrow guardrails that are very clear and specific so that they can get those wins, they can do it, and they have very clear direction to do it, can be really powerful. And then you can open them up a little bit more. Once they understand the processes, then they might have better ideas to maximize those processes. If you have people who are able and willing, then you can open those guardrails right away and say, hey, you guys, this is what we want to do. You guys have the institutional knowledge and skill. You come to me with a proposal of how you want to structure this, and then we'll work it out. If you have people who are not willing and not able, you need to have very narrow guardrails for those people, and you need to hold them accountable, because you have to be able to say, look, this is what we're doing. I'm not seeing evidence that you're doing it. You need to help me understand why, but you don't get to choose to not be part of the boat. Like, we're all on this boat together. And so it really, a smart leader is leading through the lens of his people or her people, not through, this is who I am as a leader.
So you think these guardrails can be, varied depending on who you're talking to, maybe by the individual or group or whatever. Okay, so that gives me a better understanding, and maybe maybe this whole like universal guardrail that people do, whether it's too narrow or too wide, is why we have all these kind of stand ups and team meetings like you mentioned before, where 40 people are on there, because it's so hard to get everyone kind of going in the same direction on the same road even, and so maybe that's why. So maybe that's just an efficiency beyond the human element of that, is like, and again, I think if you cater to the weakest link, you're going to exclude the high performers and the real innovators and the real change makers, if you will. And so, yeah, that's a very valuable lesson for leadership, I think, from your research there, which is I find very interesting, and something, I do a lot of government consulting work, and trust me, the amount of meetings just to have meetings it was mind blowing. And you always wonder, is this happening in corporate America as well? And from what you're telling me, it probably does. And this is something we can all do. And I think from a human leadership perspective too, it would make everyone feel better. And then I guess a follow-on question to that: so these people who are the boat sinkers, as you called them, like, how long do you keep people like that around? Do you work to try to get them to become a sightseer, or a rower at some point, or like where's the balance there, and how does that fall into leadership as you've observed it?
So one thing that I think is, you look at the boat sinkers and you have to first kind of break them into two subgroups. There are some boat sinkers that are unwilling because they think they're unable. And once you have some clarity around what you're asking to do and you provide some support for them and they realize, oh, this is doable, then they become willing. And then you have some people who just don't want to change. And, I see people hanging on to people who dig their heels in way too long. And maybe I'm a little bit too black and white on this, but I think it comes down to an accountability. And if you have a clear vision of what you're doing, and if you're following some of the other procedures around decision making, where you're dialoguing, you're making decisions, you're coming to consensus, then you could sit down and I could be like, hey, Bobby, our team came to consensus and agreed that this is what we were doing. We dialogued about it. We came up with the decision. We thought through all of the different angles, and we came to a consensus, and you did too. I don't see you doing this, and I need you to help. I need you to help me understand what's getting in your way. And so you give them the first option. And people don't do things for three reasons. They either don't know how, they don't want to, or logistically they can't. There's something that's preventing them. So finding out what that core reason is, and then being able to set a clear goal of like, okay, it's like the directives. The choice to do this is not there anymore. We're doing it, right? You had an opportunity to put your voice in here and help us shape it. If you didn't do that, then you didn't do that. Next time, please do, so that you can feel more comfortable. But at the end of the day, you came to consensus on this, and we need you to be if you don't do your part, you're screwing up everybody else's. So setting, and I'm always amazed too, where in the coaching realm, people will come in, they'll have a corrective conversation. They're afraid to really get into the nitty gritty of like, look, this is your job. You need to do it, but you don't have to be mean about it. Like the real art of coaching is that you are giving somebody corrective feedback and they're walking out of your office empowered, as opposed to defeated and angry. So finding a way to address what is the real root cause. And this is where brain science comes in as well. The way our brain perceives reality is we have 80% of our brain traffic is below our nose. It's unconscious. So there's a whole lot of thinking and perceptions that are being formed that we don't really have any control over. We're not directing those. They're automatic. And they're based on our whole entire history of these filters that get put into our sensory memories. So everything that happens to you, say you grew up in a home with a super critical father who was always needling you. Nothing was ever good enough. You always had to do more, 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 which on one hand was good because it made you, a seeker. Like, you're out there, you're always trying to improve, you're always working hard. But on the other hand, it created a filter in your voice that you're never going to be good enough. So now you go into work and now you're being asked to change, and now you're no longer going to be a resident expert, and now you're scared. Your brain is scared. Even though up here you might not be saying that, your brain down here is registering fear. So you might be having a fear reaction that's making you unable to access the reasoning and problem solving of your thinking. So a good leader can kind of understand, what's the real complaint under the complaint? What is the fear? And it may be that that person has always been a resident expert, so you don't think they need as much kind of coddling. I hate to use the word coddling, but support and hand holding to get moving, but maybe they do because this is something new to them. So understanding people changes the way you frame those problems, and it can help you get the boat sinkers rowing.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic and a great way to think, because so often you'd think the expert would just go along and adapt and overcome but especially if you change something that's been going on for a decade or longer, then it is very difficult for them. And I've never thought about that human element. And yeah, I mean, I do like this whole concept of bringing the humans into the leadership, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what you're dealing with. Whether earlier you said a sweatshirt or a mug or something like that, that's not what you're leading. That thing's going to exist regardless but the people behind it and the culture and then the productivity, all that stuff is wow. I mean, especially in change management specifically, I mean, because like I said, people really don't like change. I mean, if I'm honest, I don't like change. If I have to change my routine or change something, that the way I think about something, sometimes it is difficult, right? Because we are programmed, like you said, that subconscious brain, the way we operate. Are there any other C's that we cover? I know we did the planning. Did we get the bottom ones? Did we go all the way through them all?
Yeah, we went through them at a high level overview.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? I'm sorry.
One thing I would say too is when I hear leaders, because blame rolls downhill always. And so you'll hear leaders say things like, well, my staff just hates change. My staff hates meetings. To me, I look at that as a leadership problem, not as a staff problem, because people don't dislike change. It's just change is hard and it requires effort. If they see that change is going to make a huge difference in their life, like losing weight, that's hard. Losing weight is hard because it requires changing habits. But when I get to a point where I'm disgusted enough with myself or I have a health issue that's related to that, then that motivation to change, because I know it's something good and it's something that's going to be beneficial to me. I don't necessarily like the process of changing my habits, but I like change. And so I think reframing that idea of people resist change, they do resist change because it's hard. But if you have all the supports and you're taking them step by step and you're celebrating all the way, then people won't dislike change. They'll be excited about it because it's not seen as a dangerous change. It's seen as an opportunity for improvement, whether it's self-improvement or organizational improvement. And then the same thing with meetings. They'll say, oh, my staff hates meetings. Well, maybe they hate your meetings because they're not useful, right? People like to collaborate and share. And if you have a really purposeful meeting, people walk out feeling good. Like, I'm cleared up. I know what I'm doing. This is great. You had a great idea. So liking or not liking meetings to me is one of those factors I look at when I go in, because I just listen for, if I go into a company and just hear what the leaders say here, look for the nonverbals, look at how staff is engaged in their work. And you can learn a whole lot by the things that they blame their staff for and vice versa.
Yeah. And ultimately, all leadership, you got to take extreme ownership of it, right? It's you do hear my team, my this, my this. Well, it's that's the problem a lot of the times. Not all the time, but so much of this leadership problems that we have can be settled with us. And that's why, I think looking at the human element of your employees or your followers will help you look at your own. So you've got to look at that mirror as like a two-way if you're a leader, right? Like how are my actions impacting others? And then how can I learn from them to become better and nurturing? And that's one of the things that really scares me about leadership. And that's why I like the whole concept of self-leadership of all the theories, is because it does start with you. And what can you do to be better? And, let's face it, a lot of leaders these days are so overbooked. They got to a leadership position not because they're good leaders, but because they're good at whatever they do, whether it's engineering or, you name it, whatever their ability is, that brought them a leader. But really, most times those people not most times, but you look at the turnover of CEOs and corporate leaders today. It's pretty quick, right? It's rare to see a CEO that's been there for 30 or 40 years, because what got you there won't get you there, right? And that's a common phrase. But in leadership, I think we need to really take heart of that, and understanding human elements, I think, is a big step forward. So, what would you recommend to someone who's hearing this for the first time and wants to implement this? Because it is a long game, but you got to start with short incremental, the wins, the progress there. How would you tell someone to start this process if they haven't been operating like this?
So the first thing is self-awareness, just what you were just saying. So the first part of the book is really a dive into different models of leadership. It's not super theoretical, but it goes through some basic science around motivation and engagement, and then has the leaders really reflect on, like, am I doing this? And am I reflective? And do I know who I am? Do I know what my triggers are that cause me to shut down or get angry? So I think really being very self-aware, and I say there's three things that make people happier, healthier, and more successful, regardless of whether you're a leader or not. And the first is self-awareness. The second is self-regulation. And the third is self-control. And you can't have regulation and control if you're not self-aware. And I see a lot of people who are very not self-aware. So understanding how your own brain works can be really powerful. So the book, the Aspirations to Operations, it goes through these C's, but one of the things that I did, and I really hope people when they read it will do this, take your time, because there's stop and think questions at the end of each chapter that really ask you, and I say in the book, get a journal and keep a journal and answer these questions and get to know yourself as a leader through the book. And then there's also tactics that you can try with your team and reflect upon, and all of the tactics that are in there are things that I've used successfully with companies, and so if they go through the book step by step, it holds their hand all the way through. And I was really deliberate in that, because I feel like so many leadership books are just inspirational, but they don't tell you how. And then, people come in with this, oh, we're going to do this. Everybody was talking about the right seat on the right bus at the right time for this, right? But they didn't know how to make the bus. So it was like, okay, this is aspirational. It's not operational.
Yeah. That whole self-awareness, I think, is so critical, and something we don't practice, or we don't know. I had an expert on who did their PhD study on being better, and instead of doing better, and he put out a statistics, and I'm probably going to get it slightly wrong, but like 75% of the people say they're self-aware, but in reality, less than 15% truly are self-aware, and that takes a lot of work, a lot of effort. Regardless of what you're trying to do, whether, even in any attempt that you do, any change you try to make personally, you need to get that self-awareness. You got to find, we always talk in coaching and leadership about finding your why, but truly that's part of self-awareness, is what is your why? Why do you want to change? Because just change for change's sake is not good either. So I definitely like that. And then you said self-control, and what was the third one? Self-discipline?
Self-regulation.
Self-regulation, right.
Yeah.
Right.
When you think about that self-awareness, like, I think understanding and being willing to face, like, as a leader, make a list of the things that just drive you nuts and annoy you. And then ask yourself, what is the fear beneath it? Is it that I was a resident expert and now I'm not? So I'm feeling like I'm a, fraud, and I'm trying to pretend like I'm a leader and I'm not? Is it that you have had experiences in your life where criticism has been too painful and it hasn't been presented as a growing opportunity? So when you're faced with criticism, you get defensive and push forward. So really kind of understanding your own sort of triggers for fear, and then understanding that the way your brain works. So all of this thinking is going on in your limbic system. So the way it works is, like, if you think of a banana as reality, and then you think of like a spaghetti strainer as a filter, those filters are formed through experience, emotion, and repetition. So if you have lived in a world where you have had a constantly critical adult in your life, or coach or teacher, or somebody that made you feel bad, your brain associates I feel bad or I feel threatened with yelling. So it could just be somebody yells at you, and that triggers your stress system. Those associations aren't always logical. So for example, for me, I get dysregulated when I'm late. And so I've been very proactive in my life about, like, being early, because I don't want to go through the stress of being late and being anxious about it. I know where that comes from. It comes from when I was 8 years old and my dad and my mom were divorced, and my dad would be late to pick me up pretty much all the time. So I would sit on the front stoop waiting for him, and my brain associated feeling left out, feeling unloved, feeling negative feelings with lateness. Those two things don't go together. If somebody's running late, it's not because they don't love me. It's probably because they have bad time management skills. But my brain associated those two. Now that I know that, I can employ this part of my brain, the rational part. And I always tell leaders, like, this is the CEO of the organization of your brain. And your brain's just like an organization. It's got, like an HR department, it's got a, fulfillment department, it's got all those different departments. And just as a CEO of an organization doesn't do those jobs, it's your responsibility as the leader to make sure all those departments are running efficiently. And so if you've got stress system out of control, then you're not doing a good job as the leader, because you get to tell your brain how you want it to operate. And so once you are a little bit self-aware, you can start talking down to your brain. So like if I'm starting to run late, I can say in my mind, this is not that. This is not, you're not going to do this, limbic system. You guys knock it off. You're trying to hijack my brain and it's not okay. We're fine. And I can do some of that self-talk to relieve my body, because what happens is if your body gets ramped up, your amygdala, which is your security monitor, like sends a note up to your CEO and says, hey, we're in danger. And this whole part of your brain is just keep you alive. So they say, we're in danger. Go grab a cup of coffee down at the bodega. We don't need you right now. We'll get you, later when you're safe. And so your CEO is not in the office, which is why you blow up and you say something stupid and then you calm down and you're like, why did I say that? That's not even me. That was mean. That's not who I am. It's because you weren't there. It was your limbic system acting. So especially in leadership where there is so much pressure and stress and you're managing people and you're managing emotions, understanding how to increase the traffic from here down to your limbic system, to you get to tell the limbic system how you want it to behave, not the other way around.
Yeah, wow, that's really powerful. I mean, your positive self-talk is one of the key elements of self-leadership or self-talk in general. It doesn't have to be positive, right? And I find so much of it is negative, and that's something I struggled with years in my journey to become a better person. I had to start talking out loud what was going on in my head. So one, I would hear it, and maybe even my wife or others would hear it, and that self-correct over time, because most of that isn't true anyways, not for the current situation. Like you said, your time management went back to something that you were eight. I also hate being late as well. I've never thought about the root cause of it, but now I just try to have more compassion with, I mean, we live in a busy town, traffic, that sort of thing. But people who are perpetually late, that's still something I gotta deal with, because to me, time is the most precious resource we got, and so I don't know if that's it or not. That's how I rationalize it, but. Yeah, that's really interesting. And that whole self-regulation, I really like the point that you said, write down what bothers you.
Yeah.
So often as leaders or any kind of development that we do, we always focus on, the positives and how we can make it better. How can I run faster? How can I jump higher or whatever? Well, how about if you can't, I don't know, tie your shoe well or something? I mean, that's stupid, an example, but those are the things we probably need more work on, right? Because overall, the comprehensive you know, who you are being, really are your flaws. And the more you can improve those, the better. And that's the truth with leadership too. A lot of people like these 360 assessments. And I think if they're done right, and people, again, I think you got to have the culture, you got to have the communication, you got to have that before you can do a 360, because if not, you're just affirming what you already believe about yourself, right? But
Right.
Having someone as a mirror, whether you can do it yourself or bring in a coach, a consultant, whatever, to help you see those blind spots, that's where we need to improve. And I think that'll help our organizations, that'll help our leaderships, and everything. So very interesting. And I love the whole brain to leadership connection, because it's starting to emerge a little bit out there, and but I don't think people really understand why they do what they do, right? A lot of people will tell you that they're interested in, like, why does Lisa do what she does? Well, why does Bobby do what I do? What are these patterns, and what's helping me, and then what's preventing me from excelling? And as a leader, at the end of the day, our jobs is to make our followers' lives better, remove the obstacles that you talked about earlier, help them achieve what they want to do. And then also that whole communication part, and we talked about it, but kind of glossed over it. I mean, that's so valuable, because just sharing what you know with someone. I think speculation is cancer in an organization, and certainly to a person if they don't understand what you're saying. And again, this is just something that a leader, after you brief something, you can look at people. That's another thing you mentioned earlier, observe people. If you're putting out information and you see one person kind of glossing over, maybe as a leader, you pull them aside and say, hey, did you understand this? Is there anything else, any further questions or things like that? Just taking those 2, 3, even if it's an hour, will do so much for the change and for the organization and for the whole culture, like you said earlier, to protect. Because again, we all have to work, right? We have to work to live. So why not make it enjoyable, and why not do the best environment you can? Do you have any other kind of closing thoughts or anything you want to put a bow on this? I know we talked about a lot. Of course, tell people where they can get to you. Tell them. I know we talked about your book and you mentioned it one time. So make sure we'll put all this in the show notes so people can get to it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
and I know this isn't your only book either, so promote your other ones as well.
Right, sure. Yeah. So I would say that, again, the goal is self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-control. And I think if we understand that our behavior is our biology and our context, and so if we can understand our biology and we can make a context that is safe, emotionally, intellectually, psychologically safe, supportive, and proactive. Like you mentioned the word proactive a minute ago. And, that is so critical. If you know yourself, you can be proactive to make your context more supportive for yourself. And then if you know your team, then you can be proactive about your team. And, the story you just mentioned about taking a minute to pull somebody aside, that shows them that you are seeing them. They are seen. And that you noticed, and that your goal is not, I have to tell you this, and now it's your fault if you don't do it. Your goal is to make sure that they feel knowledgeable and supported. And so one of the things I talk about with communication is most communication is egocentric. It's, I have something to say, I said it, and now I'm disappointed because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You didn't have the action or reaction that I intended. So when I work with leaders on communication, I say you got to flip that around and be strategic. You have to say, what is the action or reaction that I want to achieve with this communication? Who are the people that I need to elicit that action or reaction from? And then how do I message what I'm saying to them so that those people will do those things, as opposed to just, I told you to do it, and now why isn't it getting done? So I think that leaders, they can take their leadership from frustrating and semi-effective to really fulfilling and very effective by incorporating the human system into the way that they lead.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's really good. That's communications. Often we just see it as a signal out, but it's a two-way, right? It is a two-way street, and you can say anything you want, but if someone doesn't understand it or doesn't internalize it, then what good is it, right? Like you said,
Or if it's not
egocentric. I like that. Yeah. I
Yeah,
like
if it's
that.
not aligned with what they value. I talk about workplace values in the book, and if you're not aligning your messaging with things that people value, you get a mismatch and people shut down. So,
Yeah.
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 But yeah, the book, I know we're running out of time, but the book is available on Amazon. It's called Aspirations to Inspirations, and I'll send you a link to my author page where they can see the other books that I've written as well. But I really encourage people, like, read it, take your time, do the journaling, go on that journey to be more self-aware, self-discovery, and then the tactics that I put throughout the whole book you'll see such a change in the level of engagement and fulfillment that your team has, and at the end of the day, you end up better, you're more efficient and productive as well.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, and take the time, because all change takes time, and even your individual change as a leader is going to take time too. So don't expect, flipping a switch. It's going to take time. It's going to take thinking, especially when you talk about the self-awareness and then leading to the self-control, self-regulation. That's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to have to figure out what works and doesn't work for you. But don't be scared to try it, because if you don't try anything, you're not going to improve. So, yeah, fantastically. So, well, thank you for taking your time and sharing all these insights insights to us. It's a very novel concept to me, and I want to know how my brain works better so I can lead others better and become, like I said, if I can't lead myself, then how can I lead others? So I think this will help everyone who's searching on that path to be better, whether they're leading an organization or just their home or even just themselves. Like, we can all do better, and if we understand the world and the way humans act and the way they think better, we can cut out a lot of this angst and anxiety that we're seeing around the world today, and have more compassion, more empathy, all the things people say they want, but why aren't we doing them, right? So this is a good method to understand and move forward. So thank you again for your time, and best of luck on the book. The book she didn't mention, it just came out a couple weeks ago or a week ago, and so go out there, and again, we'll put all the links in the show notes for everyone. But again, thank you. And for all those who are listening, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Keep leading yourself. Do that self-assessment. Find what you can control, and then find what you can regulate, and then start understanding how others think and see what happens. Just observe what leading yourself and then translating to leading others, what you can do. I hope everyone has a wonderful week. And until next time, I'm Bobby Shelton. God bless everybody.